Christopher Hitchens, another one of your books, Why Orwell Matters. Why does he matter? And who was he?
George Orwell was an Englishman born in 1903. The book came out for what would have been his centennial. He actually only made it just into the second half of the 20th century. He died in January 1950, just after completing what was probably his best-known book, 1984. What else was he? He was born into the sort of upper middle class, but not with any money or capital. His father had been in the opium business between British India and British China. He was, in a sense, an imperial drug dealer. Orwell briefly worked for the empire as a policeman in Burma before deciding that he found imperialism disgraceful. And from then on identified basically with the victims of the British system. Became for a while a tramp, an odd job, low-wage menial worker, excuse me. When fascism came, he went to Spain and volunteered to fight in defense of the Spanish Republic. Got involved with a leftist militia that was opposed to the Communist Party in Barcelona. Got shot in the throat by the fascists, very nearly got shot in the back by the communists, and wrote a wonderful book called Homage to Catalonia, the best book written about the Spanish Civil War. Out of these experiences, the reason I say he's important, why he matters, is that of all the writers of the 20th century, when the big three issues of that century were fascism, communism, and imperialism, Orwell was the only one to have analysed all three of them correctly, in effect. That would be my view. With no more resources than a person of average integrity and intellectual honesty can bring to bear. He never had a steady job, he never had a steady publisher or a proper outlet. Often his books were banned or suppressed, or his articles went unpublished. So he's my exemplary case of how much a single individual with a bit of nerve and a bit of literary ability can do in a very short life. 46.
If he were alive today, who would he be writing for?
It's impossible. I have played that game, and you can up to a certain point, and people do, because of his reputation for integrity and prescience. A lot of people want to invoke him and have him on their side. I don't think it's relevant to ask anymore, because he would be more than 100 now. So the game stops, I think, a bit before that. I think, for example, Norman Podhoretz, who's another admirer of Orwell and, shall I say, rival of mine. Mr. Podhoretz and I don't agree on things. He says, for example, he's sure Orwell would have taken the Lyndon Johnson position, that's to say, on Vietnam. I'm practically certain that he wouldn't. And he could have lived that long, because he was very, very hostile to colonialism in Asia, particularly the British, but even more so perhaps the French. And I think he would have understood very clearly that the origin of the Vietnam War is the attempt by the United States to resuscitate French colonialism in Indochina, and then to succeed it. Well, he wouldn't have been in favor of that to begin with. He wouldn't have thought it was a worthy enterprise, to the contrary. So I think one can, to that extent, predict some of his moves. But most of the real political positions he took are all you need. You don't need to speculate on what he might have thought. It's enough to know what he did think, and more important, how he thought. And basically, what he did was educate us, especially in a wonderful essay called Politics in the English Language, which will be 50 years old, I think, I must check, this year. Educate us in, no, it must be more than that, I'm sorry. Educate us to see through the ways in which language is misused as propaganda.
Just prior to our discussion now, we showed some of your favorite writers. And
sorry, it must be 80 years or something since Politics in the English Language. I know it's an anniversary this year. Excuse me.
No problem. We showed some of your favorite writers. P.G. Wodehouse, English novelist, is listed there. Emailer. Will you please tell the C-SPAN audience why Wodehouse matters?
Yes. Well, there are in literature, there are a couple of, everyone knows, double acts, imperishable characters, Sancho Panza and Don Quixote. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. For my money, though, Bertie Wooster and his manservant Jeeves is really the locus classicus here. The dialogue between those two men and the adventures that they undergo together I just think is a class by itself. The one to read, if you can only pick one, the full-length novel to read, because there are many, many short stories, would be The Code of the Woosters. The absolute genius. Couldn't possibly be without it.
We're going to put the phone numbers back on the screen in case you care to participate in our conversation with Christopher Hitchens on In Depth this afternoon. If you live in the East and Central Time Zone, 202-737-0001 is the number for you to call. If you live in the Mountain or Pacific Time Zones, 202-737-0002. BookTV@cspan.org is our email address. Another email, this is from Barry Friedman in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I have this running debate with my in-laws, good Republicans all, over whether your hatred for the Clintons is greater than your disdain for Bush.
Huh. Well, it's not really hatred for the Clintons. I'd prefer to say contempt for them. That's I mean, there was a fashion at the time for what was called Clinton hating, and often took a rather paranoid form. I didn't regard myself as part of that. It was contempt, really. And for the president, I'm not quite sure what the word would be. Because you see, I'm a single-issue voter, and on the main point, which is the incompatibility between us and any totalitarian or terrorist system or state, I think is essentially right. I mean, I think he feels that that has to be fought. I don't think he's particularly good at doing it, but that's a second-order question for me. And of course, I do have disdain and contempt and sometimes hatred for his awful piety and for his silly blatherings about faith, as if faith was a virtue in itself, which I simply don't think it is. If I come to you and say, hey, I'm willing to believe a whole lot of extremely important claims without any evidence at all, now will you respect me? I would say no. I would expect the answer no if I was saying it myself.
Next call for Christopher Hitchens. St. Louis, you're on the air.
Hi there. Good afternoon. Well, you just said the first thing I can agree with. I didn't vote for George Jr. or President Clinton either. We could have done without both of them. But I wanted to talk first about Mother Teresa. Can you hear me? Because I can't hear you.
Yeah.
Yeah, we got, okay, Mother Teresa, three things. First of all, she felt God's presence in her life for a long time. You know, that's between her and God as far as I'm concerned. But she was inspired by God to begin her mission to the sick of Calcutta, and she never denied that it was God that inspired her. Secondly, the fact that we sell these high-tech weapons and financially have supported leaders like Hussein and the royal family of Saudi Arabia, you know, to keep the oil flowing from these countries, while they were having anything but democracies. That is why these people hate us. Why don't people say the truth about why they hate us? And last, you know, it's a sad day when, regardless of the fact that most Americans want us out of Iraq, believe it was a mistake,